Our maps of the ancient world are missing entire continents. We piece together history from ruins on dry land, but the most important stages for early human drama now lie at the bottom of the sea. This is not just a story of water covering rock. It is a paradigm shift, a fundamental rewriting of archaeology and mythology forced upon us by a simple, staggering fact. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived on vast coastal plains and fertile shelves that are completely submerged today. The loss of these enormous, habitable landscapes demands we reinterpret everything from ancient migration routes to the very locations of legendary, lost lands. By the end, you will understand how this hidden geography is the master key to unlocking our deepest past. What if the myth of Atlantis is not a fantasy but a faded memory of a sunken coastline? Could the universal stories of a great flood be the echoing trauma of rising seas witnessed by countless generations? Our journey will move from discovery to reinterpretation, connecting drowned worlds with enduring legends. What forgotten chapter of human history do you think is waiting beneath the waves? The proof of this lies beneath the North Sea. Between Britain and the Netherlands, the waves now roll over what was once a vast and vibrant continent. We call it Doggerland, named for the Dogger Bank, a submerged sandbank that was once its central hill country. For millennia, this was not a sea but a heartland. During the last ice age, so much water was locked up in glaciers that global sea levels were over 100 meters lower than they are today. Doggerland was the connecting bridge, a sprawling plain of rivers, marshes, forests, and rolling hills that linked the British peninsula seamlessly to mainland Europe. It was a rich ecosystem teeming with game like mammoth, reindeer, and aurochs, and it was home to generations of hunter-gatherers who followed these herds. Their world was not a marginal coast, it was the center of their universe. Then the climate shifted. The great ice sheets began to melt, and the waters started their relentless rise. The story of Doggerland's end is not one of a single catastrophic event, but a slow, inexorable drowning that unfolded over centuries. Communities would have watched their familiar hunting grounds shrink, their rivers swell into estuaries, and their forests become salt marshes. The final chapter likely came around 6150 before Common Era, when a massive submarine landslide off the coast of Norway, known as the Storiga slide, triggered a devastating tsunami that swept across the remaining low-lying islands. After that, the North Sea was complete and a continent vanished from human maps, but it did not vanish from human memory. The significance of Doggerland is monumental. It is not a theoretical lost land, it is a proven one. Archaeologists have dragged trawls across the seafloor and brought up not just animal bones, but finely crafted tools, weapons, and even fragments of human-made artifacts. This was a populated territory, a real place where real people lived, loved, and raised families. Its disappearance provides the most concrete case study we have for how an entire chapter of human geography can be erased, leaving behind only subtle echoes. Some researchers suggest the persistent British folklore of Lyoness, a sunken kingdom off the coast of Cornwall, or even the Dutch legend of the sunken city of Seefting, could be distant cultural memories of this profound loss. More tangibly, the genetic links between populations in Britain and mainland Europe tell a story of connection that was only severed when the land bridge faded beneath the waves. Doggerland forces us to accept a simple, powerful truth. If an entire inhabited continent can sink and be forgotten, then how many other stories are waiting on other buried coastlines? The story of Doggerland is not unique. It is a single, powerful chapter in a global epic of loss. From the frozen north to the tropical equator, coastlines everywhere were once radically different places. The world map you know is a snapshot, a mere moment in geological time, between 20,000 and 5,000 years ago. As the last great ice age retreated, sea levels rose by over 120 meters globally. That is the height of a 40-story building. This was not a gentle tide coming in. It was a planetary-scale transformation, redrawing the map of every continent. Vast coastal plains, river deltas, and entire continental shelves that were once dry, habitable land are now submerged under shallow seas. This is not speculative fiction or fringe mythology. It is established geological fact confirmed by core samples, sonar mapping, and the undeniable evidence of ancient river channels carved into the seafloor. The implications for archaeology and for our understanding of human prehistory are staggering. For the majority of our species' existence as hunters and gatherers, we lived in a world with far more land. Our ancestors did not avoid the coast. They thrived on it, drawn to the rich resources where rivers met the sea. The most favorable places to live, the areas with the highest biodiversity and easiest travel routes, were precisely those low-lying plains that were the first to vanish beneath the rising waters. So when we look for the earliest signs of complex society, of migration, of art and ritual, we are literally looking in the wrong places. We are searching on the dry land that remained, often the less hospitable uplands and interiors, while the true cradles of early culture may be dozens of meters underwater, preserved in silt but lost to our textbooks. This realization forces a humbling question. How much of the human story is simply missing, not because it was destroyed, but because it was drowned? To reconstruct these vanished worlds, scientists must become detectives of the deep, reading a landscape hidden under hundreds of feet of water. The primary tool for this investigation is sound. Modern sonar technology, much like the echolocation used by dolphins, sends precise pulses of sound toward the seafloor. The time it takes for the echo to return, and the character of that returning signal, creates a detailed topographic map of the submerged terrain. This is how we discovered the haunting contours of Doggerland's hills and valleys. But to see beneath the seafloor itself, researchers use a more powerful technique called seismic reflection. By generating stronger sound pulses and analyzing the complex echoes that bounce back from different layers of sediment and rock, they can create a cross-section view, a geological scan revealing the buried history. These scans show the unmistakable signatures of ancient river systems, their channels carved into bedrock now blanketed by millennia of silt. They reveal the outlines of long-vanished lakes and the boundaries of vast coastal plains. To confirm what these sound pictures suggest, scientists turn to physical evidence. Using specialized ships, they drive hollow tubes deep into the seabed to extract core samples. These long cylinders of layered mud and sand are like time capsules. By analyzing the pollen grains, microscopic shells, and even DNA fragments preserved in each layer, researchers can read the environmental history like a book. A layer rich in oak and hazel pollen tells of a dense forest. A shift to salt marsh plants marks the moment the sea began to encroach. The bones of land animals give way to the shells of marine creatures, documenting the precise moment a freshwater river became a brackish estuary and then part of the open ocean. Together, these methods allow us to draw a new map, a paleogeographic reconstruction that overlays the ghost of the past upon the blue of the present. We can now visualize the sprawling, fertile plain that once connected Alaska to Siberia across the Bering Land Bridge, a highway for human migration into the Americas. We can trace the extensive Sunda Shelf, a sunken continent that connected the islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Borneo into a single landmass called Sundaland. The evidence is no longer speculative. It is physical, measurable, and etched into the very fabric of the planet. This is the map that wasn't, now being redrawn not by cartographers, but by geologists and archaeologists listening to the echoes of a drowned Earth. The evidence on the seafloor is undeniable, but the echoes of this loss may have traveled much farther. If these vast, inhabited landscapes vanished over generations, what traces did they leave in the human mind? The answer might be found in one of the most persistent stories our species has ever told. Across the globe, from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the mountains of Greece and the rainforests of the Americas, cultures separated by oceans and millennia share a common narrative. It is the story of a great flood. In the ancient Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the god E warns the hero Utnapishtim to build a great boat to survive the waters sent to wipe out humanity. In the familiar Hebrew story, Noah follows a similar divine instruction. The Greeks wrote of Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulating the earth after a deluge sent by Zeus. Indigenous stories from the Pacific Northwest to the Amazon basin speak of a time when the waters rose and the world was remade. For a long time, scholars viewed these tales as purely symbolic, as myths about divine punishment or cosmic renewal. But the geological record of drowned coastlines asks us to reconsider. Could these stories be a form of deep cultural memory? It is highly unlikely that every single flood myth describes the exact same event, or that a single tsunami inspired global legends. The power of the flood narrative lies in its universality precisely because the experience was, in a very real sense, universal. For thousands of years, as sea levels crept upward, community after community, generation after generation, would have witnessed the same slow-motion catastrophe. They would have seen their favorite fishing coves disappear, their ancestral hunting grounds turn to salt marsh, and their homes forced further and further inland. The ocean was not a static boundary. It was an advancing, unstoppable force. After enough generations, the specific memory of a place called Doggerland or Sundaland would fade. But the core trauma, the profound lesson that the sea can take the land, would harden into story. It would become a warning, a foundational myth explaining why we live here on this high ground, and not on the fertile plains our ancestors once called home. The Great Flood, then, is not just a metaphor. It is likely the distilled memory of a planetary-scale event that unfolded in slow motion, witnessed by countless human eyes, and passed down until it became legend. This transforms mythology from mere fantasy into a potential historical record, a way of preserving a truth too vast for a single lifetime to hold. This brings us to the most famous lost land of all, a legend that has captivated seekers for millennia. The story of Atlantis, first described by the philosopher Plato around 360 before Common Era, tells of a powerful and advanced island nation that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. For centuries, the search for Atlantis has been a hunt for the spectacular and the improbable. People have placed it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, in Antarctica, or even off the coast of Florida. But what if everyone has been looking in the wrong way? What if, instead of searching for a fictional super-civilization, we apply the geological reality we now understand? The most logical location for a lost coastal society is not in the deep ocean, but on a continental shelf that is now underwater. Plato himself placed Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which are commonly identified as the Strait of Gibraltar. This points squarely to the Atlantic, but not to its abyssal depths. During the last glacial period, when sea levels were much lower, the continental shelf extending from the coasts of Spain, Portugal, and Morocco was a vast exposed plain. Islands that are now mere specks, like the Madeira and Azores archipelagos, would have been large, mountainous landmasses. This was a habitable, potentially resource-rich zone. The geological framework changes the question entirely. We are no longer asking, where is a magical sunken continent? We are asking, where were the coastlines when early seafaring cultures like the Minoans or mysterious sea peoples were active in the Bronze Age? A thriving port city or a regional power center built on a low-lying delta or coastal plain would have been extremely vulnerable to the combined effects of sea level rise, land subsidence, and a major seismic event. The Mediterranean region is geologically active, prone to earthquakes and tsunamis. A catastrophic event, like the volcanic eruption that devastated the Minoan settlement on Thera, could have easily been magnified in storytelling over centuries, transforming the loss of a coastal trading network into the cataclysmic sinking of an entire empire. Plato's description of Atlantis, with its concentric rings of water and land, its advanced engineering, and its eventual moral decay, reads less like a historical report and more like a philosophical parable built upon a kernel of geographical truth. The theory gaining traction among modern researchers is not that Atlantis was a global superpower, but that it represents a distorted memory of a real Bronze Age society whose homeland was swallowed by the sea. This society would have existed on land that is now submerged on the Atlantic shelf or in a Mediterranean bay that has since flooded. Its destruction by earthquake and flood would have been a traumatic, watershed event for the maritime cultures of the time, a story told and retold by sailors for generations until it reached Plato's ears. This approach does not prove Atlantis was real, but it does something far more profound. It validates the mechanism of its loss. We no longer need magic or aliens to explain a sinking land. The planet itself provides the explanation, and the map of our drowned coastlines provides the possible locations. The search shifts from fantasy to forensic paleogeography, asking not if a land could sink, but where lands we know did sink and who might have lived there. The Mediterranean we know is a carefully crafted illusion. Its iconic coastlines, where ancient cities now perch dramatically above the water, are a recent chapter in a much longer story. During the peak of the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago, global sea levels were so low that the entire Mediterranean basin looked radically different. The waterline was over 100 meters lower than it is today. That is a vertical drop greater than the height of the Statue of Liberty. This exposed a hidden geography of staggering scale. What are now submerged continental shelves became vast, fertile coastal plains. The Adriatic Sea, for instance, was largely a dry valley, a northward extension of the Italian peninsula with a great river running down its center. The Aegean Sea was not a scattered archipelago but a broad, rolling landscape, with today's islands like Crete and Cyprus standing as inland mountains. The land bridge between Sicily and Tunisia was fully exposed, creating a complete connection from Europe to Africa. These were not barren wastelands. They were prime real estate, some of the most desirable habitats on the planet for early human societies. As the glaciers retreated and the climate warmed, these newly exposed plains would have been the first to green with vegetation, attracting game and, in turn, the hunter-gatherers who relied on them. Later, when agriculture began to spread from the Fertile Crescent, these same low-lying plains, with their rich alluvial soils and reliable water sources, would have been the perfect nurseries for the first farming communities in Europe. Think of them as the lost suburbs of the ancient world, the sprawling, productive hinterlands that supported the rise of civilization. Then the waters returned. The inundation of these Mediterranean margins was not a single event but a relentless, centuries-long process. As the sea crept inland, it swallowed entire ecosystems and human landscapes. Coastal villages, fishing grounds, and farmlands were gradually abandoned. Populations were forced to retreat and compress into the smaller, more mountainous areas that remained above water. This geographical squeeze had profound consequences. It intensified competition for resources, likely fueling conflicts and prompting innovations in social organization. It also fundamentally reshaped trade and communication. A maritime route that was once a short hop across a narrow strait could become a much longer, more dangerous open water journey as the plains flooded and islands became isolated. The loss of the land bridge between Sicily and Africa, for example, severed a crucial migration and trade corridor. The story of early Mediterranean civilization, then, is not just one of people moving into new territories. It is also a story of a world shrinking around them, of horizons closing in and communities being pushed together by a rising blue wall. The vibrant, interconnected cultures of the Bronze Age emerged not on a static map, but on one that was actively drowning its own recent past. While the Mediterranean was losing its plains, a far larger continent was vanishing on the other side of the world. Stretching across Southeast Asia lies a submerged world of staggering proportions, a lost continent called Sundaland. Today, we see its remnants as the scattered islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, separated by shallow seas. But during the last ice age, this was not an archipelago. It was a unified continental landmass nearly the size of Europe, connected seamlessly to mainland Asia. The Java Sea, the Gulf of Thailand, and the shallow waters around Borneo were all dry land, a vast expanse of river valleys, tropical forests, and coastal savannas. This was not a marginal territory. Sundaland was a primary highway and a probable homeland. Genetic and archaeological evidence strongly suggests it was a crucial staging ground for the earliest human migrations out of Africa and into Australia and the Pacific. Populations thrived here for tens of thousands of years, sheltered in its rich interior. Some of the world's oldest cave art, found on the island of Sulawesi, was painted when that location was not an isolated island but part of this sprawling inland region. The submergence of Sundaland was a transformative event of continental scale. As sea levels rose, the ocean breached the low-lying plains, first turning river valleys into estuaries, then flooding entire basins. What was once a single connected territory fractured into thousands of islands. This process did more than just change a map. It scattered human populations, isolating groups on newly formed islands and peninsulas. This forced isolation became a powerful engine for cultural and linguistic diversification. The incredible variety of languages and cultures found across Indonesia and the Philippines today may have its roots, in part, in this great geographical fragmentation. Communities that once shared a continuous landscape now found themselves separated by newly formed straits, their stories and technologies evolving in separate directions. The drowning of Sundaland also raises a tantalizing possibility for the origins of agriculture. Some researchers propose that the first experiments with plant cultivation may have occurred not in the well-known Fertile Crescent, but in the fertile, now submerged river valleys of this lost continent. The rising seas would have swallowed the evidence, leaving only hints in the surviving botanical records of the region. Whether or not that specific claim holds, the sheer scale of Sundaland's loss forces a profound reconsideration. We must view the vibrant, diverse cultures of Southeast Asia not as products of isolated island evolution alone, but as the inheritors of a vast, unified homeland that now lies silent beneath the waves. Their myths of great floods and sunken ancestors are not mere folklore. They are the deep, geological memory of a world that was. While Sundaland fractured into islands, another great land bridge met a different fate. Far to the north, in the frozen realm between continents, lay Beringia. Today, the Bering Strait is a narrow, icy channel separating Russia from Alaska. But for thousands of years, it was not a strait at all. It was the center of a subcontinent, a dry, windswept plain over 1,000 kilometers wide connecting Asia to the Americas. This was not merely a barren corridor of ice, as it is often imagined. During the last glacial maximum, while massive ice sheets covered much of Canada, Beringia remained a relatively ice-free refuge, a phenomenon scientists call a refugium. Its climate was cold and dry, similar to the Arctic steppe of today, but it supported a rich grassland ecosystem. Herds of mammoth, bison, and woolly rhinoceros grazed its valleys, followed by predators and, crucially, by human hunters. The emerging picture from archaeology and genetics suggests people did not simply sprint across this bridge in a hurried migration. Instead, they thrived there, possibly for millennia, isolated from their Siberian ancestors by the very glaciers that made the land bridge accessible. Beringia was not a passageway. It was a homeland, a lost continent in its own right, where generations lived and developed a unique cultural identity before anyone ever set foot on what we now call North America. This extended occupation helps explain the genetic and linguistic diversity later found in the Americas. The first peoples were not a single, homogeneous group that arrived in one wave. They were the descendants of a population that had spent a long, formative period adapting to a specific world. Then the world changed again. As the climate warmed, two transformative events occurred simultaneously. The great ice sheets to the east began to melt, opening interior routes into the continents. But at the same time, the rising global sea levels began to flood the Beringian plain from the south. The Pacific Ocean encroached, slowly turning the vast steppe into a shallow sea, severing the land connection forever. This was not a sudden flood, but a geographical amputation that took centuries. For the people who had moved east into the Americas, the bridge behind them literally vanished. They were now permanently isolated, cut off from any return to Asia. This profound geographical isolation had a monumental impact. It set the cultures of the Americas on a completely independent trajectory for thousands of years, developing agriculture, empires, and belief systems without the influence of the Old World. The loss of Beringia also left a haunting legacy in myth. Among some indigenous cultures of the northwest coast, there are stories of a time when one could walk to distant lands, or of a world that was once whole before the waters came and separated the people. These are not literal histories of Beringia, but they are a powerful cultural echo of a fundamental geographical truth. A vast, habitable land that once connected worlds is gone, and its disappearance shaped the destiny of two continents. The story of a lost paradise is written into our oldest myths. One of the most enduring is the Garden of Eden, described in the book of Genesis as a lush, idyllic garden at the confluence of four rivers, a place of perfect harmony before humanity's fall from grace. For centuries, scholars and explorers have tried to locate this mythical garden on our modern map, with little success. But what if the search is flawed because the map itself is wrong? A compelling geological hypothesis suggests we should not be looking in Mesopotamia, but under it. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Persian Gulf looked nothing like it does today. The shallow basin was almost entirely dry, a vast, low-lying oasis. The mighty Tigris, Euphrates, and Kharon rivers did not empty into the sea as they do now. Instead, they flowed southward across a gently sloping plain, converging into a single, massive freshwater lake or a fertile wetland of enormous size. This was not a desert. Fed by glacial meltwater and reliable rivers, this sunken basin would have been a verdant paradise, a refuge of incredible biodiversity in a world that was still largely arid. It was a perfect habitat, a true garden for the hunter-gatherer communities of the time. Then the ocean returned. As global sea levels rose with the melting glaciers, the Indian Ocean began to spill over the Strait of Hormuz. Around 8,000 years ago, or 6,000 before Common Era, the saltwater rapidly flooded the basin. The transition would have been geologically swift, a relentless incursion that turned a freshwater Eden into a salty sea within a few human generations. The communities living there would have witnessed their world literally dissolving, their fertile hunting and fishing grounds vanishing beneath an advancing wall of saltwater, forcing a permanent retreat northward. This event, known as the Persian Gulf Oasis Hypothesis, provides a startlingly literal candidate for a paradise lost. The description of Eden as a garden at the source of 4 rivers fits this ancient, drowned confluence perfectly. The profound cultural trauma of losing such a resource-rich homeland could have echoed for millennia, crystallizing into a foundational story of a golden age, a fall, and an expulsion into a harsher world. The descendants of those who fled the flooding would have become the founders of the first cities in Sumer, just to the north. They carried with them not just tools and knowledge, but the deep, collective memory of a greener, easier world swallowed by the sea. In this light, the myth of Eden transforms. It is no longer just a theological allegory about sin, but a potential geological allegory about loss. It becomes a story of climate change and displacement, a narrative forged in the trauma of rising waters that reshaped the cradle of civilization itself. This re-examination of ancient coastlines forces us to reconsider the very paths our ancestors walked. For decades, the dominant story of human migration out of Africa and across the globe followed an inland route. We pictured small bands of hunters tracking herds across savannas, moving through river valleys and mountain passes. But a compelling new hypothesis suggests we have been missing half the map, the half that is now blue. This is the theory of the Kelp Highway. Imagine not a dusty trail, but a watery green corridor. The idea proposes that early humans, possessing simple watercraft like rafts or dugout canoes, traveled not just beside the ocean, but along its very edge, exploiting one of the planet's most abundant and stable ecosystems. The key was the coastal kelp forest. These underwater jungles, found in cool, nutrient-rich waters from Japan to California, are incredible engines of life. They shelter dense populations of fish, shellfish, sea otters, seabirds, and marine mammals. For a migrating population, this highway offered a consistent, predictable larder. Unlike hunting mammoth on the unpredictable plains, the tidal zones and kelp beds provided food that returned with the rhythms of the moon and seasons. You could harvest mussels, abalone, and crabs from rocky shores, hunt seals on offshore islands, and gather seabird eggs. This marine-based diet is rich in the fatty acids crucial for brain development, potentially fueling the cognitive leaps that characterized modern humans. The Kelp Highway was not a single road, but a global network. It could have facilitated the rapid peopling of the Australian coastline over 60,000 years ago, and the movement of people from Northeast Asia into the Americas, skirting the icy interior by traveling down the productive rim of the North Pacific. This model makes coastal migration not just possible, but highly logical. Yet here lies the great archaeological irony. If our ancestors were master coastal navigators, living and traveling along the shore, then the vast majority of the physical evidence for this chapter of human history is gone. Every campsite, every shell midden, every stone tool workshop they left on that ancient, now submerged coastline is currently under tens of meters of water, buried under centuries of silt. We are trying to read a book whose most important pages have been dissolved by the sea. This creates a profound gap in our record. We find compelling evidence of early seafaring, like the ancient settlement on the island of Crete that dates back over 130,000 years, proving humans could cross significant water barriers far earlier than we thought. But the stepping stones they used to get there, the coastal waypoints and seasonal camps, are lost. This makes coastal migration both more plausible and paradoxically harder to prove. It rewrites our models from the ground up, or rather, from the seabed up. We must now accept that the story of human dispersal is not solely written in stone tools found in desert caves. It is also written in landscapes we can no longer see, in a way of life adapted to a shoreline that vanished, leaving behind only the faintest echoes in our DNA and the stubborn persistence of coastal cultures worldwide. This creates a monumental challenge for the very science trying to uncover it. The archaeology of these drowned worlds is an endeavor of immense difficulty, a silent hunt in a hostile environment. The first and most obvious hurdle is the water itself. Every meter of depth adds pressure, cost, and complexity. Specialized equipment is not a luxury, it is an absolute necessity. Research vessels, remotely operated vehicles, advanced sonar arrays, and teams of divers trained in archaeological techniques represent a staggering financial investment compared to a traditional dig on dry land. The window for work is often narrow, dictated by weather, currents, and visibility. A storm can shut down an entire season's project in an afternoon. And then there is the issue of preservation. While the silt and mud of the seafloor can create remarkable, oxygen-free conditions that perfectly preserve organic materials like wood, leather, or even food, these same materials are incredibly fragile. The moment they are disturbed or brought to the surface, they can begin to deteriorate rapidly without immediate and costly conservation. It is a race against time, even after discovery. But perhaps the greatest challenge is the sheer, overwhelming scale. We are not looking for a single shipwreck in a defined area. We are searching for the scattered remnants of entire landscapes across thousands of square miles of seabed. Finding a stone tool or a hearth site in that vast, featureless blue is like looking for a single, specific grain of sand on a beach. This practical reality creates a profound and systematic bias in the archaeological record. Because it is exponentially easier to survey and excavate on current dry land, that is where the vast majority of our discoveries are made. Our understanding of ancient human life is therefore built primarily on evidence from caves, river valleys, and inland sites. Yet, as we have seen, these were often secondary habitats, places people moved to as the coasts flooded. The primary zones of settlement, the rich estuaries and coastal plains where populations were likely densest and societies most complex, are the very zones now lost to the sea. We are, in a very real sense, trying to understand a civilization by only studying its remote mountain villages, while its capital cities lie submerged and out of reach. This bias shapes our textbooks, our theories of human development, and our perception of the past. It means every discovery on land, as valuable as it is, might only be telling us part of the story, the chapter written after the flood. Deep in the arid hills of southeastern Turkey, a discovery stands as a silent, monumental question mark. Göbekli Tepe, a vast complex of carved stone pillars arranged in circles, dates back over 11,000 years, making it the world's oldest known megalithic site. It predates Stonehenge by 6 millennia, and it was built by hunter-gatherers long before the rise of cities or even widespread agriculture. This inland sanctuary, however, holds a secret etched into its limestone. Among the intricate carvings of foxes, boars, and scorpions, archaeologists have found something profoundly out of place. There are detailed depictions of water birds like ducks and cranes, which suggest a wetland environment. More strikingly, there are clear carvings of marine creatures. Scholars have identified what appear to be jellyfish, and perhaps even a species of crab or lobster. These are not abstract symbols, they are precise observational images of animals that live only in the sea. This presents a fascinating puzzle. The people who built Göbekli Tepe lived and worked nearly 200 kilometers from the nearest coast, in a landscape that was likely dry even then. So why fill their most sacred space with images of the ocean? One compelling theory suggests these carvings are not decorative fantasies, but cultural memories. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, or their immediate ancestors, may have originated from a now vanished coastal world. As the Mediterranean or the nearby Black Sea coastlines flooded with rising waters, communities would have been displaced, forced inland in search of new territory. They carried with them not just their tools and traditions, but the iconic imagery of their lost homeland, the creatures of the shore and the sea that had sustained them and shaped their world view. Göbekli Tepe might then represent more than a temple. It could be a monument of displacement, a sacred site founded by refugees from a drowning coast, who used their most advanced communal effort to etch the memory of their ancestral world into stone. The marine iconography becomes a clue, a cultural fossil pointing back to a way of life that had literally been washed away. This connection transforms our understanding of early sites. An inland archaeological discovery is no longer just a story about the people who lived there. It can be a portal, a message in a bottle from a maritime culture whose own home is now at the bottom of the sea. If true, it means the very first monumental architecture in human history might have been built not by people settling down, but by people remembering what they had lost. Far to the north, another inland sea holds a secret that could rewrite the story of the flood. The Black Sea today is a vast, salty body of water, but its floor tells a different tale. Lying beneath hundreds of meters of dark water, scientists have found a submerged landscape that looks hauntingly familiar. Sonar images reveal the clear, winding channels of ancient riverbeds, the outlines of drowned waterfalls, and even what appear to be former shorelines now far below the surface. This ghostly geography points to a time when the Black Sea was not a sea at all, but a much smaller, isolated freshwater lake, sitting well below the level of the world's oceans. The water lapping at its shores would have been sweet, not salty, and its coastlines would have extended far out onto what is now the continental shelf, creating a fertile basin for human settlement. This sets the stage for one of the most dramatic hypotheses in modern geology. Around 7,600 years ago, or 5,600 before Common Era, a pivotal moment may have occurred. As global sea levels continued to rise from the melting glaciers, the Mediterranean Sea eventually topped the natural earthen dam that separated it from the Black Sea basin at the Bosporus Strait. What followed, according to the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis, was not a gentle trickle but a cataclysmic rupture. Salt water from the Mediterranean would have come thundering through the breach with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, a roaring, unstoppable cascade. The freshwater lake would have been violently invaded, its level rising rapidly, perhaps as much as half a foot per day. Within a matter of months, the shoreline could have retreated by a mile or more, swallowing over 60,000 square miles of land. For any community living along those fertile, low-lying coasts, this would not have been a slow, generational change. It would have been an apocalypse witnessed within a single lifetime. The geological evidence for this event is compelling, yet fiercely debated. Core samples taken from the Black Sea floor show a sharp, sudden transition. In older sediments, researchers find layers rich in the shells of freshwater mollusks. Directly above that, in a layer of chaotic debris, those shells vanish, replaced instantly by the fossils of saltwater species. This suggests a rapid and permanent change in the basin's chemistry. Furthermore, the discovery of drowned river channels and ancient beaches far below current sea level confirms the basin was once much shallower. The controversy lies in the timing and the speed. Some geologists argue the flooding was a more gradual process, taking place over centuries, not months. They point to more complex sediment records and question whether the breach at the Bosporus was a single, dramatic event. The debate is technical and ongoing, a reminder that reading the Earth's diary is never simple. But the power of the hypothesis lies beyond pure geology. If true, the event would have been a localized catastrophe of almost unimaginable scale. The sudden, relentless advance of a new ocean would have forced a massive, panicked migration of people and animals. Farming villages, fishing camps, and entire territories would have vanished beneath the waves, their stories cut short. The trauma of such a loss would have echoed through the generations of survivors who fled to higher ground in the Balkans, Anatolia, and beyond. It is here that the hypothesis makes its boldest connection to myth. This region is the very cradle of some of the world's oldest flood stories. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its detailed account of a great boat and a world covered in water, originated in Mesopotamia, but its roots may stretch northward. Could the Black Sea deluge be the real-world cataclysm that, over thousands of years of retelling, evolved into the universal story of the flood? The hypothesis does not claim to explain every global flood myth, but it provides a stunningly specific and plausible source for the ones that emerged from this part of the world. It suggests that the most enduring story of divine punishment might, at its heart, be a human story of geological displacement, a searing memory of the day the land died and the maps were redrawn by water. The Black Sea hypothesis offers a grand geological explanation for a global myth, but a far more recent and documented event provides a crystal-clear case study. We can witness the mechanics of a lost coastline in real time with names, dates, and shattered pottery. This is the story of the Minoans, a brilliant Bronze Age civilization centered on the island of Crete. While Egypt built pyramids, the Minoans constructed sprawling, multi-story palaces without defensive walls, their walls adorned with vibrant frescoes of dolphins and bull-leaping athletes. They were a maritime power, their sleek ships dominating the Aegean Sea, connecting a vast trade network that stretched from Greece to Egypt. Their capital, Knossos, was a labyrinth of artistry and administration, a testament to peace and prosperity. Then, around the year 1600 before Common Era, the world literally exploded 70 miles to the north. The volcanic island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted with a force estimated to be many times greater than the famous Krakatoa event. The cataclysm was unimaginable. The central part of the island collapsed into a void of magma, creating the enormous caldera we see today, but the destruction radiated outward. A towering column of ash would have darkened the sky across the eastern Mediterranean. Then came the tsunamis, generated by the volcanic collapse. Walls of water, perhaps 30 meters high, raced across the sea toward Crete. They would have smashed into the Minoans' northern ports and coastal settlements with obliterating force. Archaeological excavations at sites like Amnissos reveal buildings shattered, their foundations scoured by wave action, and layers of sea-borne pumice and ash deposited far inland. Yet the water's direct impact was only the first act. Volcanic eruptions of this magnitude can trigger a more subtle, insidious process called land subsidence. The immense release of pressure from the magma chamber can cause the surrounding crust to sag or sink. It is possible, even likely, that parts of Crete's coastline, particularly in the north facing the eruption, actually dropped several meters during or after the event. What was a thriving port facility one day could have become a submerged ruin the next, not from a wave, but from the very land giving way. This combination of tsunami and subsidence would have been a 1-2 punch of absolute devastation. The Minoan fleet, the source of their wealth and power, was likely annihilated in its harbors. Their coastal agricultural lands were salted and flooded. The psychological blow of seeing the very shoreline retreat must have been profound. While the civilization did not vanish overnight, its power was broken. It entered a period of steep decline, becoming vulnerable to conquest by mainland Mycenaean Greeks within a couple of centuries. The memory of this catastrophe, of a sophisticated island kingdom crippled by the sea and the earth, did not disappear. It lingered in the region's collective consciousness. Centuries later, the Greek philosopher Plato would pen his account of Atlantis, a powerful island nation that sank beneath the sea in a single day and night. The details are not a perfect match, but the core narrative is hauntingly familiar. A great maritime power, an island location, a sudden cataclysmic destruction involving both earthquake and flood. The Minoan collapse provides a tangible, historical template. It shows us how a real advanced society can be dismantled by coastal cataclysm, and how that trauma can echo through the ages, slowly transforming from history into legend. Off the coast of Japan's westernmost island, the sea holds a mystery that defies easy explanation. In the clear, deep waters near Yonaguni, divers encounter a breathtaking sight. Massive monolithic structures rise from the seabed. We see what appear to be immense flat terraces stacked like giant steps. There are sharp 90-degree angles, straight walls that run for dozens of meters, and geometric shapes that look eerily like pyramids or platforms. At the center of the site is a striking feature many call the monument, a colossal slab of rock nearly 50 meters long, with two parallel pillars and a triangular niche that looks deliberately carved. The entire complex feels architectural, like the ruins of a sunken plaza or a ceremonial center. It is a place that immediately sparks one overwhelming question. Are we looking at a masterpiece of nature or the remains of a lost human civilization? This question has ignited one of the most passionate and enduring debates in modern underwater exploration. On one side are geologists who point to the bedrock itself. The Yonaguni formations are made of sandstone, a sedimentary rock that naturally fractures along straight lines and flat plains as it weathers. The powerful currents of the region, combined with seismic activity, could have perfectly sculpted these blocks through purely natural processes of erosion and collapse. The apparent steps could be the result of sandstone layers shearing off at different rates. The straight lines and right angles, while startling, are not uncommon in jointed rock formations found all over the world on dry land. From this scientific perspective, Yonaguni is a magnificent example of nature's own stonemasonry, a geological accident that tricks the human eye into seeing design. On the other side are researchers and archaeologists who argue that nature alone cannot explain everything. They point to specific details that seem to lack a natural analog. There are what appear to be two round holes drilled into the rock, a feature not typically created by erosion. Some see what looks like a carved relief of a human face or an animal. Most compellingly, they highlight the collection of what seem to be perfectly circular depressions or small basins arranged in patterns on the flat terraces, which could be interpreted as post holes or mortises for holding wooden structures. For these investigators, the combination of these features with the overall layout suggests at least some level of human modification, perhaps the quarrying and shaping of a natural rock formation by an ancient culture for a sacred or communal purpose. The Yonaguni monument stands as the ultimate case study in the profound challenges of underwater archaeology. When a site is submerged, the context is stripped away. On land, an archaeologist finds a shaped stone alongside pottery shards, hearth ashes, and tools, all within a clear layer of soil that can be dated. Underwater, a single feature like a straight wall exists in isolation, surrounded by sand and fish. The currents that may have helped shape it also scour away any loose artifacts that could provide definitive proof. The site becomes a Rorschach test where our desire to find lost cities can powerfully influence what we see in the ambiguous shapes of stone. This forces a necessary and humbling caution. The romance of discovering a sunken city is immense, but the standards of proof must be even higher than on land. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and in the silent, shifting world of the seabed, that evidence is often the hardest thing to find. Whether Yonaguni is a natural wonder or a human one, its true value may lie in the lesson it teaches. It reminds us that the drowned world does not give up its secrets easily, and that our journey to understand it requires both open minds and rigorous skepticism. The debate over Yonaguni highlights the need for clearer evidence, a standard that another sunken site delivers with remarkable force. Far from the ambiguous stones of Japan, off the western coast of India, mythology and marine archaeology converge in a way that feels almost like confirmation. This is the story of Dwarka. In the sacred Hindu epic, the Mahabharata, Dwarka is described as a magnificent fortified city built on the orders of Lord Krishna. It was a celestial metropolis of great wealth and splendor, a kingdom of gold and jewels with beautiful gardens and wide moats. the texts provide a specific and poignant end to its story. Following Krishna's departure from the world, the grand city of Dwarka was said to have been reclaimed by the ocean, sinking beneath the waves as if the sea itself was taking back what belonged to it. For centuries, this was understood as pure mythology, a symbolic end to a divine era. Then, in the late 20th century, marine archaeologists began to survey the waters off the coast of modern Dwarka in Gujarat. What they found was not ambiguous geology, but the unmistakable signature of human activity. Lying at depths between 10 and 40 meters, scattered across the seabed, are the remains of a substantial ancient settlement. There are large, well-dressed stone blocks forming walls and foundations. Researchers have mapped out what appear to be the layouts of fortifications and residential complexes. Even more telling are the artifacts. Dozens of ancient stone anchors, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, have been recovered, pointing to a bustling harbor that once hosted large seafaring vessels. Pottery shards, some dating back over 3,000 years, litter the site. These are not natural formations. They are the tangible debris of a lost human world. The significance of these finds is profound. They do not prove the existence of a city made of gold or the divine details of the epic. Instead, they validate the core historical memory preserved within the myth. The evidence strongly suggests that a major, well-fortified port city did exist at this exact location in antiquity, and that a significant portion of it was submerged, likely due to a combination of sea level rise and local land subsidence. The cultural narrative of a great city lost to the sea is not a fantasy. It is a poetic encapsulation of a real geographical catastrophe witnessed by the ancestors of the region. Dwarka stands as a powerful testament to how ancient stories often preserve hard truths. The legend provided the map, and archaeology, diving into the blue, found the proof. It demonstrates that when myth speaks of drowned kingdoms, we should listen, for it may be guiding us to chapters of our past that the sea has kept but not erased. These vanished coastlines all share a single, silent architect. The force that redrew the map of the ancient world was not a vengeful god or a random catastrophe, but a planetary-scale shift in climate. The primary driver was the end of the last great ice age, a transition that unfolded over millennia, but whose consequences were felt with startling speed by the humans who lived through it. For over 100,000 years, massive continental ice sheets, some over 2 miles thick, had locked up an enormous volume of the Earth's water. With so much moisture frozen on land, global sea levels were dramatically lower, exposing the continental shelves as dry, habitable plains. Then, roughly 20,000 years ago, the global climate began to warm. This warming triggered a chain reaction of staggering proportions. The great ice sheets covering North America and Eurasia began to melt and retreat. This was not a gentle thaw. It was a colossal release, a planetary unlocking of fresh water that had been stored for eons. The meltwater flowed in torrents back into the world's oceans. We call these sudden, massive influxes meltwater pulses. They represent periods where the rise of the sea was not a slow creep, but a rapid surge. One of the most significant, known as Meltwater Pulse 1A, occurred around 14,000 years ago. During this period, sea levels are estimated to have risen by over 20 meters in just a few centuries. That is a vertical rise taller than a 5-story building, happening within the span of only a few human generations. For a community living on a low-lying coastal plain, this would not have been an abstract geological statistic. It would have been a visible, relentless reality. A grandparent might have pointed to a rocky outcrop far out in the tidal zone and told stories of hunting there in their youth. A parent might have watched their favorite freshwater spring turn brackish. A child would have known only a shoreline that was closer each year, swallowing familiar landmarks. the loss was perceptible within a single lifetime. Shorelines could retreat by miles, not inches. Saltwater would poison freshwater lagoons and invade river deltas, forcing the ecosystems that people depended on to collapse or move inland. These rapid pulses were interspersed with slower periods, but the overall direction was unstoppable and universal. From the North Sea to the Persian Gulf, from the Bering Strait to the Sunda Shelf, the ocean was reclaiming its own. This process provides the essential context for every lost coastline we have discussed. It was not a local event or a singular mystery. It was a global phenomenon, a shared chapter in human prehistory written not in stone but in rising water. The great climate shift at the end of the Ice Age did not just change the weather. It fundamentally reshaped the geography of human possibility, drowning the stages upon which countless untold stories were first acted out. This raises a profound question about human memory itself. How could the memory of a coastline lost 7,000 years ago possibly survive into the modern era, preserved not in writing but in story? The answer lies in the underestimated power and precision of oral tradition. In societies without written records, knowledge is not casually passed down. It is a sacred duty, a cultural lifeline encoded in song, ceremony, and strict narrative ritual. These stories are not bedtime fables. They are living databases of survival information, containing vital details about water sources, animal migrations, and territorial boundaries. The accuracy required for survival fosters an incredible robustness in transmission. A compelling example comes from the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. Researchers have documented stories from coastal communities that describe geographic features which no longer exist in the modern world. Specific narratives tell of a time when the shoreline extended much farther out, when islands were connected to the mainland, and when bays were dry land. When these oral maps are compared to geological reconstructions of sea levels from over 7,000 years ago, they align with startling precision. These are not vague tales of a great flood. They are detailed accounts of a specific, familiar landscape that was home, a landscape that vanished as the seas rose at the end of the last ice age. The mechanism of preservation is not mere recollection, but trauma. A catastrophic, landscape-altering event like the rapid drowning of a coastline or the sudden breach of a sea into a freshwater basin is precisely the kind of existential shock that etches itself into a culture's core identity. Such an event forces mass migration, rewrites survival rules, and creates a stark before and after divide in history. That trauma becomes a foundational pillar of the community's story, repeated at every gathering, woven into initiation rites and sacred lore. Over generations, the specific dates and names may fade, but the core truth that the sea rose and took the land hardens into myth. It becomes a warning, an explanation for why we live here on these hills and not down by the shore. This transforms our understanding of ancient narratives. The flood myth is not a primitive attempt to explain rain. It is the long echo of a real event that reshaped the world, carried across hundreds of generations on the resilient vessel of spoken word. When a story from a culture without writing describes the drowning of a land, it is not fantasy we are hearing. It is very likely a headline from the ancient world, preserved in the deep time archive of human memory. This power of memory and loss forces us to reconsider one of history's great turning points. The Neolithic Revolution, the shift from hunting and gathering to farming, is traditionally framed as a story of discovery in the hills of the Fertile Crescent. We are taught that people in places like the Zagros Mountains or the Levant, surrounded by the wild ancestors of wheat and barley, gradually learned to domesticate plants, leading to settled villages and eventually civilization. But what if this narrative is incomplete? What if the first steps toward agriculture were not taken in the dry uplands, but on the fertile, now drowned coastlines? The logic is compelling. The most stable and resource-rich environments for early humans were not the interior valleys subject to drought, but the ecotones where land met sea. Coastal plains and river deltas offered a predictable year-round buffet: fresh water from rivers, shellfish from the shore, migratory birds, and fertile soil that could support a variety of edible plants. In such an environment, there is less pressure to risk the uncertain experiment of planting seeds. Why gamble on a single crop when the land and sea provide so abundantly? This abundance could have allowed for a different kind of revolution, not of domestication but of management. Communities might have practiced a form of settled or semi-sedentary life without full-scale farming, tending to wild stands of nutritious grasses, managing shellfish beds, and cultivating useful plants in rich, alluvial soils. They could have developed complex social structures and even early monument building, as hinted at by sites like Göbekli Tepe, while still relying on a broad-spectrum diet from a generous landscape. Then the seas rose, as the coastlines retreated mile after mile. That predictable, gentle abundance vanished beneath the saltwater. The rich estuaries and lagoons were poisoned. The productive plains were swallowed. Communities that had thrived for generations were suddenly compressed into smaller, less forgiving territories inland. The safety net was gone. In this new, constrained world, the old way of life was no longer viable. The pressure to produce food from a shrinking land base would have been immense. This crisis, born of a drowning world, may have been the true catalyst. The knowledge of plant management, developed over millennia on the coastal plains, was now not a leisurely supplement, but a vital necessity for survival. Populations fleeing the rising waters would have brought that knowledge with them into the hills and river valleys of the interior. There, facing scarcity, they intensified it. They selected seeds more carefully, cleared land more aggressively, and protected their crops more diligently. What had been a supplemental practice on the coast became a primary strategy inland. The Neolithic Revolution, then, might not be the story of a brilliant discovery in a cradle of civilization. It could be the story of a forced adaptation, an acceleration of existing knowledge triggered by the loss of a richer world. The so-called birth of agriculture was not a peaceful invention. It may have been a desperate innovation, a cultural sprint forced upon humanity by the relentless advance of the sea. This reframes the Fertile Crescent not as a unique Garden of Eden, but as a refugee zone, a receiving area for displaced coastal peoples whose lost homeland provided the foundational skills to rebuild their world. This realization rewrites our timeline of human settlement from the very beginning. The oldest towns and villages we can dig up on dry land, the ones celebrated in our history books as the first permanent communities, may represent something entirely different. They are not necessarily our first attempt at building a home. They might be our second or even our third. Think of them not as the origin point but as the refuge. When we uncover a 9,000-year-old farming village in the hills of Anatolia, we are not looking at humanity's first experiment in settled life. We are likely looking at a successful adaptation, a community that finally made it work after earlier, perhaps more promising attempts were erased by the rising sea. The coastlines where people first gathered in large numbers, drawn by abundant shellfish and fertile river deltas, are now dozens of meters underwater. The true cradles, the original nurseries of complex society, are almost certainly submerged. This means our entire historical chronology is built on a foundation of absence. We have meticulously documented the story of human resilience on land, but we have missed the first crucial act that took place on the shore. Our timeline is not a record of initial innovation. It is a record of recovery and adaptation. It tells the story of how we picked up the pieces after a global geographical disaster and learned to build anew on higher, safer ground. The transition from nomadic hunting to settled farming, long hailed as the Great Leap Forward, now appears in a different light. it may have been less a voluntary revolution and more a necessary retreat, a strategic consolidation forced upon us by a shrinking world. This reframes every ancient city we know. Jericho, Çatalhöyük, the early cities of Mesopotamia, they stand not as the proud beginnings of civilization, but as its resilient second chapter. They are monuments to survival, built by the descendants of those who watched their original homelands vanish beneath the waves. Their innovations in agriculture, architecture, and social organization were not born from idle curiosity, but from urgent need. They were solving the problems created by a drowned world, forging new ways to live in a landscape that was suddenly less generous, more crowded, and forever separated from the richer, vanished plains of their ancestors. Our history, then, is a tale told by the survivors, written on the high ground that remained. The prologue, the most formative chapters of the human story, rests in silence on the continental shelves, waiting to be read. The silent testimony of drowned coastlines finds a powerful echo in the very building blocks of who we are. Beyond the stones and sediment, two other fields of study are now whispering the same story, written in the language of our genes and our words. Population genetics, the science of tracing human ancestry through DNA, provides a map of ancient journeys that often lead straight to the edge of a vanished shore. Consider the peopling of the Americas. For decades, the dominant theory was a rapid sprint through an ice-free corridor in Western Canada. But genetic studies of indigenous populations tell a more complex and coastal tale. The DNA evidence reveals a deep ancestral lineage that points to a long period of isolation, a genetic bottleneck before people moved south into the continents. This fits perfectly with the geological reality of Beringia. The genetics suggest our ancestors did not just pass through that land bridge. They lived there perhaps for thousands of years, separated from their Siberian relatives. Their DNA diversified in that icy refuge before the descendants finally moved east as the glaciers retreated, and south as the Pacific coast opened. The genetic clock aligns with the flooding of Beringia, marking the moment the bridge was cut and the populations of the New World were set on their own independent path. It is as if our collective genome carries a memory of that lost continent, a timestamp of isolation that only makes sense when we map it onto the ancient, dry geography of the Bering Strait. This genetic corroboration extends to other drowned highways. The spread of certain lineages across Southeast Asia and into the Pacific Islands traces paths that would have been overland during the time of Sundaland, not the open ocean voyages they would later become. The genes move as the land allowed, and when the land sank, the patterns of connection changed, leaving a signature in our biology. Similarly, linguistic patterns offer another layer of evidence. Languages evolve and diverge when groups of people are separated. Just as geneticists look for common ancestors in DNA, linguists reconstruct proto-languages, the ancient roots from which modern language families grew. The distribution of these language families across the globe often hints at ancient population movements and, crucially, points of isolation. The incredible diversity of languages in places like Papua New Guinea or the Amazon basin could be the result of long-term stability and separation. But in other cases, the patterns suggest bottlenecks and fragmentations that align with geographical upheaval. For instance, the spread and diversification of the Austronesian language family, which stretches from Madagascar to Easter Island, is a story of incredible seafaring. But its origins are tied to a migration out of Taiwan. Researchers suggest this great expansion was itself possibly driven by pressures from rising sea levels on the continental shelf of East Asia, pushing coastal peoples to become even more adept sailors and to seek new islands. As the seas rose and isolated communities on newly formed islands or peninsulas, their languages began to drift apart, evolving into distinct dialects and then entirely new languages over centuries. The map of language families, then, is not just a cultural artifact. It is a historical document recording the echoes of populations being pushed together or pulled apart by changing coastlines. When we see a sudden burst of linguistic diversity in a region, it may mark the point where a once unified coastal plain was flooded, scattering its inhabitants and allowing their stories to evolve in new directions. Together, genetics and linguistics provide a form of independent verification. They are internal records carried within us and our cultures that confirm the external story told by geology. They prove that the drowning of these ancient worlds was not a passive geological event. It was an active force that shaped the biological and cultural tapestry of humanity, directing the flow of genes and the evolution of speech by redrawing the very ground beneath our ancestors' feet. The genetic echoes of drowned worlds find their parallel in the haunting folklore of Europe's western shores. Long after the great meltwater pulses subsided, the sea continued its slow, patient work, claiming land in smaller, more localized events. And the people who lived on those fragile coasts told stories about it. Off the rugged coast of Cornwall, fishermen spoke of Lyoness, a lost kingdom of forests and fair cities, said to lie sunken beneath the waves between Land's End and the Isles of Scilly. The legends describe a beautiful land, home to Tristan of Arthurian romance, swallowed in a single cataclysmic storm. To the north, Welsh bards sang of Cantref Gwaelod, the lowland hundred, a fertile realm protected by a great dike. The tale goes that a negligent keeper left the sluice gates open one stormy night, and the sea rushed in to drown the land forever. Across the channel in Brittany, the story was of Wise, a magnificent city built below sea level, protected by a great gate. Its downfall came when a princess, sometimes out of love and sometimes out of rebellion, stole the key from her father the king and opened the gate to the ocean, allowing the waters to devour the sinful city. For centuries, these were treated as beautiful, tragic fairy tales, metaphors for moral failings or the caprice of nature. But geology asks us to listen more closely. The Celtic Shelf, the continental platform extending from Britain into the Atlantic, was indeed far more exposed after the Ice Age. As global seas continued their incremental rise, augmented by periods of intense North Atlantic storms and local land subsidence, coastlines in these regions remained dynamic and dangerous. A single generation could witness a storm surge of unprecedented power, permanently reclaim a low-lying peninsula or a sheltered bay, turning a community's home into a legend for their grandchildren. The specific story of a drowned city like Wise, with its detailed memory of a protective dike or gate, sounds remarkably like a folk memory of early coastal engineering, a seawall or sluice system that eventually failed against the ocean's might. The persistent location of these myths is the real clue. They are not scattered randomly, but cluster along coastlines known to be geologically vulnerable, places where the land was slowly sinking or the seas were actively encroaching long after the ice had melted. These later European legends, then, may not be memories of a continental scale drowning like Doggerland, but of a more intimate, recurring loss. They are the poetic records of individual communities, of a specific bay or a favorite fishing ground that vanished within living memory, its story refined and moralized over centuries of retelling. They remind us that the process of coastal loss was not a one-time event, but a continuous conversation between humanity and the sea, a conversation where the rising water always had the last word, and the land's reply became a myth. The legends of drowned kingdoms were once confined to the realm of story, but modern technology is now turning those whispers into a detailed map. We are no longer limited to dragging nets across the seafloor or interpreting ambiguous sonar shadows. A new suite of tools is allowing us to see through the water itself, to strip away the blue and reveal the ghostly topography of the ancient world with stunning precision. Two technologies in particular are revolutionizing this search. The first is airborne LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. Imagine a plane or drone flying over a coastal region, firing millions of rapid laser pulses toward the ground, or in this case, through shallow, clear water. Each pulse reflects back, and by measuring the time it takes, a computer can construct a three-dimensional map of the surface below. In places like the Caribbean or the Pacific Islands, LiDAR has been used to penetrate jungle canopies, revealing lost cities. When aimed at shallow seas, it can do something equally magical, mapping the seafloor's texture and revealing the subtle contours of drowned river valleys, ancient shorelines, and even the rectangular outlines of potential human-made structures, all from the sky. The second tool operates from an even greater height. Satellite-derived bathymetry uses sophisticated algorithms to analyze the color and reflectance of light from the ocean's surface. Minute variations in the water's hue and surface texture, invisible to the human eye, can indicate changes in depth and the composition of the seabed far below. By processing this data on a global scale, scientists can generate broad, predictive maps of submerged landscapes, identifying the most promising locations for closer inspection. These technologies are transforming the search from a speculative guess into a targeted investigation. Instead of wondering where a lost coastline might be, we can now chart its river systems, pinpoint its estuaries, and identify flat, stable areas that would have been ideal for settlement. We are creating a global catalog of archaeological hotspots, a list of addresses for the drowned past. This turns the vast, intimidating ocean into a target-rich environment. It tells underwater archaeologists exactly where to dive, where to send their remotely operated vehicles, and where to focus their limited resources. Every curious bump on a LiDAR scan, every anomalous straight line on a bathymetric map, becomes a question waiting for an answer. The age of stumbling upon a sunken city by accident is over. We are now entering an era of systematic discovery, guided by the unblinking eyes of lasers and satellites, finally giving us the vision to see the world that was lost. But these sunken worlds are not just relics of the past. They are active sites of conflict in the present, caught in a complex web of law, ethics, and identity. When a discovery is made, a simple question emerges with profound consequences. Who does this history belong to? The legal framework is murky, especially for sites found beyond national borders. In international waters, the principle of freedom of the seas often clashes with the need for archaeological protection. A research vessel from one nation might locate the ruins of a coastal settlement that existed 10,000 years ago, a place that belonged to no modern country. According to current maritime law, that nation could potentially claim the right to excavate, raising artifacts and data that belong to the common heritage of humanity. This creates an ethical dilemma. Should the first to find it have the right to tell its story, or should such fragile, non-renewable resources be managed by an international body for the benefit of all? The race to map these drowned landscapes is not just scientific, it is also a quiet prelude to future claims over knowledge, and perhaps even over resources we have not yet considered. The challenges grow even more delicate when a discovery lies within a nation's territorial waters. Here, the past can reshape the present in powerful ways. A submerged site off a modern coast can become a political tool, used to bolster national narratives of ancient ownership and historical primacy. Imagine a country pointing to a sunken settlement as proof of their timeless connection to a region, influencing modern maritime boundaries or resource rights. Conversely, these discoveries can challenge established histories. They might reveal that the ancient ancestors of a modern indigenous group lived on land that is now far out to sea, potentially supporting claims to cultural heritage and traditional territories that extend beyond current shoreline. For indigenous communities, these are not merely archaeological sites. They are the resting places of ancestors and the physical proof of a homeland that oral traditions have spoken of for generations. The act of excavation, if done without deep and respectful collaboration, can feel like a second drowning, a loss of control over their own story. This forces a new paradigm in underwater archaeology. The goal cannot simply be to retrieve objects. It must be to navigate a respectful partnership between science, law, and living culture. The most meaningful discoveries will be those that honor the legacy of the people who lived there, involving descendant communities in the research process from the very beginning. The question of who owns drowned history has no single answer, but it compels us to see these lost worlds not as empty puzzles to be solved, but as sacred chapters in a human story that continues to be written. The true test will be whether we can lift this history from the depths with the same care with which we hope our own legacies might one day be treated. This changes everything we thought we knew about our origins. The evidence is no longer a collection of scattered curiosities, but a unified and undeniable pattern. From the tools in the North Sea mud to the genetic echoes in our DNA, from the universal flood myths to the drowned cities off India, a single, profound truth emerges. Our entire framework for understanding ancient history has been built on a fundamental error. We have been telling the human story using the wrong map. For over a century, archaeology has been a landlocked discipline. We have excavated caves, traced river valleys, and mapped the spread of agriculture across interior plains. We built our chronologies and theories on the evidence that survived on dry ground. But this approach has created a monumental sampling bias. We have been studying the refugee camps of prehistory while ignoring the metropolises. The most dynamic, resource-rich, and likely most populous zones of human life for tens of thousands of years were not inland. They were the coastal plains, the continental shelves, the vast, fertile margins where land met sea. These were the true nurseries of early society, the places where language diversified, where complex social bonds were forged, and where the first experiments with settled life took root. And then, systematically, globally, these stages were dismantled by rising seas. This loss is not a minor footnote. It is the great gap in the human story, a missing prologue that forces us to rewrite the entire narrative. We must undergo a paradigm shift, a complete reorientation of perspective. We must stop viewing the ancient world through the static lens of today's geography. Instead, we need to see a planet in flux, where coastlines were not fixed borders but ever-shifting frontiers, and where the most important real estate now lies at the bottom of the ocean. This rewrites more than just maps. It rewrites our understanding of cultural development. The Neolithic Revolution appears not as a spontaneous invention in the hills, but as a forced adaptation, an innovation born from the trauma of displacement as rich coastal habitats vanished. It rewrites our models of human migration. The peopling of continents looks less like an overland trek and more like a coastal voyage, a journey along a Kelp Highway that has since been submerged. Most powerfully, it rewrites our interpretation of myth. The great flood narratives and tales of sunken kingdoms transform from allegory into potential historiography, the long echo of a real, shared experience of loss passed down through hundreds of generations. The cumulative weight of geology, archaeology, genetics, and folklore all points in the same direction. We are the children of a drowned world. Our history did not begin on the land we stand on today. It began on the shores of a vanished continent, and to truly understand who we are, we must learn to read the stories written in the silent blue. The map we use to navigate the past is missing entire continents of context. Every history book, every museum display, every timeline of civilization is built upon a fundamental and unavoidable flaw. We have constructed the story of humanity from the evidence that remained on dry land, while the most formative stages of that story lie submerged. This is not a small oversight. It is a gap in our collective memory as wide as the continental shelves themselves. the buried coastlines are far more than geological curiosities. They are the missing chapters, the lost prologues to every culture we know. To truly understand our origins, we must first accept a profound humility. Our knowledge of the ancient world is not based on the full record. It is based on the fraction that survived the flood. We have been reading a library where the first volumes of every major work have been systematically removed, leaving us to piece together the plot from the middle chapters. The cities we excavate, the migrations we trace, the myths we analyze, all of these are artifacts of a world that had already lost its richest, most populated lands. They are the echoes of life after the drowning. This realization should not discourage us. It should electrify our curiosity. Every new sonar survey, every core sample pulled from the seabed, every dive on a promising anomaly is an act of recovery. We are not just exploring the ocean floor. We are beginning to read those lost first volumes. Future underwater exploration promises not just new discoveries, but a continual rewriting of the human story. Each artifact lifted from the silt has the potential to redraw a migration route, to give a name to a forgotten people, to connect a myth to a real shoreline. This ongoing journey into the blue invites us to reconsider everything. The next time you hear an old tale of a great flood or a sunken city, listen not as a skeptic but as a detective. Do not dismiss it as mere fantasy. Ask instead what forgotten coastline, what drowned homeland that story might be straining to remember. The ancient world was a different planet, and its true map is only now beginning to emerge from the waves.